Hi, my name's Phil. I'd like to talk about politics. In this video, I'd like to discuss some of the Brexit realities facing British farming, especially in light of the looming US trade deal, as well as some thoughts on why a group of people that actually, unlike most of the rest of us, have the power to beat the government on this issue, are not doing so despite their opposition to it. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, then please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So I've talked about Brexit issues relating to British farming a few times, and there's quite a lot more I could do as well. It's really quite interesting because a lot of industries that are going to be stuffed over by Brexit in the United Kingdom are indirect results of Brexit. The government aren't consciously doing anything to destroy car manufacturing, for example, or any other form of manufacturing. They're not doing anything to knacker our tourism industry. But the farming industry, they are taking action that directly and knowingly damages British farming. But what I want to talk today, I want to focus in on pig farming. And there's a guy called Peter Foster, if you want to look him up, who's written a number of articles for the Financial Times. There's no point in me linking to any one, but you could look him up. And he has been writing about the impact of Brexit and the US trade deal on British farming. And it's obviously been talking to the farming community. And one of the issues he highlighted is to compare British with American pork. Why is the US version so much cheaper? He starts out. Now, largely this comes down to welfare of the animals. So in the UK, pigs have access to straw, outdoor space, a wallow. Stalls are not used. They're banned in the UK. Chemical additives to the food that are used in the US are also not used in the UK. So what this means is the higher welfare standards for the pigs means that there is therefore a much higher cost to producing the pork because the pigs have that higher level of welfare. Now, and this won't be the first example of this. What that does is that creates the following situation. So if Boris Johnson is allowed to sign us up to the US trade deal that the US government have proposed, British pork farmers will not be able to compete in their own market in Britain. Even with the extra cost of transporting pork products across much of America and then the Atlantic Ocean, the American pork will be cheaper. In addition, it's not like British pork farmers will then just be able to export all their higher standards produce, because we're losing out on free trade agreements with everyone who would buy it, not just in the EU, but that's the most obvious market. So our products will cost more than the American pork in this country, but they'll also cost more than the equivalent standard pork in the EU, because other EU pork producers will be able to sell their pork to the same standards, but without tariffs. In other words, apart from the possibility of a few high-end markets in Britain, British pork farmers will simply not be able to compete. So that's the situation. What could be done about it? Now, before I go through the options, to save time, let us remind ourselves of another fact. The reason why the US will insist, and I mean insist, that we lower our food standards in the same way that the EU insist on a level playing field in order to get a deal. And remember, these lower food standards, the Conservatives have already started to legislate. Utterly irrelevant. In fact, they've even stopped saying that they're not going to allow lower food standard stuff into the country. But the reason why the US will insist on this is because the farming lobby in America is very powerful and is very involved in this US trade deal and the talks. And they will simply not allow their government to agree to anything that doesn't allow them to sell their lower end produce in the UK. And it's easy for them to lobby the US government to do that because everyone knows the British government is absolutely desperate for the US trade deal. Utterly desperate, and they're in a hurry for it. And that's all there is to it. If they don't get to sell that sort of produce competitively in the UK, they will lobby against their own government to stop the deal. So bearing that in mind, a few options. Option one, suggested by some of Boris Johnson's cabinet ministers, who are not all fully on board with this, by the way. It's important to note that there is some opposition to this plan in the Conservative Party, but even in government. And that is to have split tariffs. Now, the idea would be that food that doesn't meet our standards will still be allowed in the country. It's like, oh yeah, it can still come in, but it would be subject to higher tariffs than the food that does meet those standards. Now, the theory is that the stuff that's cheap because it's produced to lower hygiene or animal welfare standards would not be competitive because of the higher tariffs. But that idea doesn't work. It doesn't even get off the starting blocks because the US farming lobby would lose the competitive advantage that they'd want from the trade deal, and so will lobby against it. 2, you allow British farmers to lower their standards. So in other words, you allow food to be produced to lower standards of hygiene and animal welfare in this country. Now, at the moment, the government are not planning on doing this. They are going to allow food into our market that is produced to lower standards, but they will not allow food to be produced in this country to those lower standards at the moment. But if they did that, if they did allow British farmers to lower their standards, then British farmers would lower their standards. Of course, it's the only way to compete, with the exception, as I say, of a small number who will be able to supply the high-end market. But most would drop animal welfare and hygiene standards right down in order to compete with those American products. However, you've then got the same problem as option 1. That would then allow British farmers to compete in the UK market with American farmers, and they don't have to shift their produce thousands of miles to get it to market either. So it will be very competitively priced indeed. Well, that doesn't suit the American farming lobby either, because they will not shift as much of their produce in this country, if any. Same reason as with the tariffs. All they care about is getting another market for their products. They will only support a trade deal that does this and will forcibly oppose any deal that does not. There'll be no point in telling them, well, you can, sell your stuff in the UK, because if they can't sell it in the UK because no one will buy it. Option 3 is to simply allow British pig farmers to fight it out over the high-end market, the only thing left for them, and for the majority of the industry to collapse, a sort of porcine Hunger Games. Now, unsurprisingly, this is the government's current plan. Of course it is, because it's the only option that would meet with the approval of the US farming lobby, and so the only route to getting a deal with the US. And of course, that is just looking at pig farming. The same principle applies to all farming. So, and this is the bit that absolutely baffles me. Why, oh why, are British farmers constantly going on about how bad Brexit's going to be for them, how bad this US trade deal is going to be for them, really trying to drum up support and get a campaign going? Why are they doing that and not using the power they have to actually stop it in a way that is guaranteed to work? Because, as I've noted before, they are in a unique position to stop it. Campaigns are all very well and good. There are a lot of campaigns going on at the moment. There's a lot of people screwed over by the Conservative government one way or the other. They are shouting in a crowded market by just running another campaign. British public opinion is already against the lowering of food standards, both in terms of hygiene, because people don't want to get sick, and animal welfare, because we don't want to be unnecessarily cruel to animals. We still want our bacon butties. But most people don't know what's happening. Totally unaware. And farmers running social media campaigns, that's not going to get the message out to enough people. Again, there's a lot of campaigns out there. They need something that will hit the national headlines for days in a row. The sort of thing that most campaigners could only dream of. Now, there's a lot of industries that cannot do that, but farmers can. I've said it before, but I'll remind people that in the year 2000, With rising fuel costs, the haulage industry was facing increasing costs and wanted the government to cut fuel duty to compensate for the increased cost of fuel. A relatively small number of lorries ran rolling roadblocks on roads, but more importantly, actually blockaded the very small number, a couple or something, of oil refineries and fuel depots in this country. It wasn't difficult. There's not a lot to blockade. And with a small number of lorries, they were able to bring the country to a complete standstill. It meant that the issues became so widely reported that everyone in the country knew what was going on. Reported on a daily basis. Not everyone in the country may have agreed with the lorry drivers' aims or their actions, but everyone was then informed of the issues. Now, farmers don't generally have lorries, but they do have heavy sort of mobile machinery in the form of tractors. It would be a piece of piss for them to carry out similar action. The government would be utterly powerless to stop it. Heavy-handed tactics wouldn't even work on a practical level, and they wouldn't dare anyway. A fair few Conservative MPs are in agricultural constituencies. They simply cannot afford to go to war with the farming industry. And it would be on the front pages of every newspaper and headline news on every TV station on a daily basis. In 2000, it was an absolute nightmare to Tony Blair's government. This would be a nightmare of epic proportions to Boris Johnson's government as well. There'd be simply no way of stopping it without agreeing something with the farmers. They really would hold all the cards. Now, I know the government would normally love for the media to be reporting on anything but their coronavirus handling right now. But I'll tell you something, they wouldn't consider this to be an improvement. And it wouldn't take that much of the farming industry to even take part. You wouldn't even have to have the farming industry united. It would help if it was. And it's so easy. It's been done before. Proven. And yet they don't. Someone explain that to me, please. Someone explain that to me. But there it is anyway. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.